This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Over 25 years helping leaders reducing errors and incidents. Here is your host of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast, Rob Fisher.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Essential Leadership Cycle podcast. I'm your host and intentional leader, Rob Fisher, coming to you from the ArrowHP.com studios in the Fit Center for Excellence here in Concord, North Carolina. In the last episode, we described the fourth attribute of the Essential Leadership Cycle, trust. I hope listeners immediately use some of the recommendations at the end of the podcast to start making changes in their intentional leadership. By now, you should have downloaded the eColors app and are using that information to manage your strengths and potential limiters in your day-to-day interactions. In this episode, I'm going to discuss the next attribute of the Essential Leadership Cycle, diversity and inclusion. Most organizations out there have some form of diversity element in their vision and values, their mission, or their way of doing business. It sometimes seems that diversity and inclusion have become buzzwords that organizations and leaders know they have to use to show that they are with the times. But very similar to some of the other elements of the Essential Leadership Cycle, when I get managers and senior leaders one-on-one away from the meeting room, they're all over the board as to what it really means to be diverse and inclusive. In fact, many of them don't know what diversity and inclusion are, and that they're actually different things that have been grouped together. Many organizations think and treat diversity and inclusion as a human resources program, and they try to play along under HR's rules. I don't think enough organizations have taken the time or energy to help the leaders understand both the power and the need for diversity and inclusion in the workforce. I recently heard a great description that I'd like to share. Then we can feed off this moving forward. You see, diversity is a fact. It is a condition. It's tangible. We look different, sure, but sometimes diversity can't be seen, even though it's still a condition. I'll talk about that in a minute. Inclusion, on the other hand, is a choice. Inclusion is action-based. We can choose to be inclusive or exclusive for that matter, but then we must also take the actions needed to actually include. When we did the personality diversity work in preparation for Super Bowl 51 in Houston a few years ago, we got a new lesson in diversity and inclusion almost every day. It was great to interact with the almost 10,000 volunteers whose job it was to make the Super Bowl experience the best it possibly could be for the over 500,000 visitors. The eColors system underpinned the framework we used because individuals with different eColors tend to think and react differently to input, processes, change, stress, time pressure, and many more attributes. Not everyone who came to the pre-party was a football fan. How do we make their experience good? Not everybody in Houston could go to the Super Bowl. How do we make their experience good? Not everybody was going to speak English. How do we make their experience good? I think you're getting the picture. In order to answer those questions with a goal and vision of a great Super Bowl experience, we had to get diverse thoughts into play. It's not enough just to ask for diverse thoughts. You have to actually seek it out. Since the diversity of thought is a condition that is difficult to see, you have to play to the individual's personality tendencies to try to get diverse thoughts on the table sometimes. Some personalities freely offer their thoughts and opinions, and sometimes you don't even have to ask for them. But some personalities will only offer up their thoughts and opinions when prompted in the way that they accept. Then they will offer up those thoughts and opinions only to the extent that they trust you or the organization. Sometimes that is a trust based on their previous experience with you. Perhaps the last time you asked them for their input, you either ignored it or didn't do the right thing with the information. This will limit the openness for them to divulge their diverse thoughts. I have a friend that works in a smaller school district. While she's respected in her job, she has to do it over all of the schools in her district. She was appointed to a commission for the state, and all of the other members were from pretty massive school districts in the big cities. She really didn't know what she had to add to this group that would be of value. Nevertheless, the group stated that they wanted all thoughts and opinions so they could make the best decisions possible for the state, and encouraged everyone to speak up when they had a thought, idea, or opinion, even the new people. Her natural personality tendency is to keep pretty quiet and only to interject when she's asked directly or when she agrees. She told me she was encouraged to speak up, that's inclusion, but it was hard for her. Sometimes she had to push her play button, use personal intervention to interject her thoughts, and each time they were both appreciated and well received. After the event, the head of the commission thanked her personally for her input, even the times when she challenged the thoughts of the bigger districts because they got a better outcome as a result. My point here is that inclusion is a two-way street. First, one has to be open to including others. Then we have to be open to offering up our diversity. Sometimes we need to use tools to do that, like she used her play button or personal intervention to speak up when it wasn't natural or wasn't really comfortable. We have more than our fair share of diversity today, but I think we've lost some of our will, some of our fortitude, or some of our desire, you pick it, to be inclusive of diverse thought. As leaders, we cannot let ourselves fall into the traps of our current environment, where a whole lot of people believe that anybody that thinks differently than they do is not only wrong, but should be persecuted in some way. Intentional leaders have to overcome the urge in themselves and lead a team of others that have to overcome the current tide of thought diversity leading to exclusion instead of inclusion. It's easy to include diversity that you can see, but make sure you can also seek out diversity that you can't see. One of the reasons we promote making your e-colors or personality tendencies visible, whether by wearing a wristband or a sticker or some other indicator, is that it makes your personality tendencies more visible and allows a better opportunity for inclusion. So what can you do? First, seek out others with diverse personality tendencies for input. You can bet that if their personality tendencies or e-colors are different than yours, that they will usually have a bit of a different outlook or thoughts on whatever it is you need input on. Second, when you form teams, make sure they contain diversity, all types of diversity. Make sure the discussion is a part of the team's startup. Help each other understand how and why you need to ensure that you have inclusion of diversity. And last, make sure the people that you engage within your organization understand through discussions with you how important the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion are. Diversity, for looks' sake, is not real diversity. And just because someone's there doesn't mean they're included. This is a great topic for leadership teams to use in their values-based engagements. Until next time, this has been your host, Rob Fisher. Thanks for listening, and remember, intentional leadership starts with you.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.